Thank you for joining us again for another episode of Living Next Chapter. So great to see where people are listening to us from around the world. Thank you so much. Today we have Jennifer Soames on, and she's going to be talking about traumatic brain injury, telling her story, what has happened to her in the past, and how she is turning this into a way of helping others. So if you know somebody in your circle of life who is struggling with this and looking for answers, Jennifer shares some great knowledge on the podcast. She's an awesome resource as well that you can reach out to, and she will help you and give you the information you need. She's a great advocate for anybody with T.B.I. And so happy to have her on the podcast today. Jennifer Soames, Living the Next Chapter. Here she is. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I have a new author, new to me, that's on the show with us today. Great story, great information, and something that's going to help people. And I know even within my own family, this is a topic and something that some of our family members are dealing with. So really glad and happy to have Jennifer Soames with me today. Jennifer has a website, headofhope.com, and Jennifer has a book as well to help people with traumatic brain injury, and a topic that I think we're going to reach a lot of people and be able to help a lot of people today in our conversation. Jennifer, so thank you so much for taking time. Like we mentioned, we've been both busy day today. We're ending our day off together, and really the best are always saved for the end. So I'm very excited and anticipate a great conversation.
Thank you, David, for having me.
It's nice to see you again. It's nice to we've done the pre-interview a while back, and now we have a chance to come in and do the recording. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. It's going to be really good.
Great. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it too.
Excellent. So let's do this, Jennifer. We talk about this with other guests that come on, other authors. I would love to kind of do a little background story to kind of level set and understand where we're going to go in the episode today. Can you take us back a little bit and share a little bit about your journey and how this kind of all began?
Absolutely. It was the Friday before Thanksgiving in November of 2013. Having been a long-time horse person and rider, I was in a horseback riding lesson doing dressage and riding a horse that I had not ridden before, though I had met, so I knew who this horse was. But we were riding our lesson and she spooked. And regardless of how good of a rider one might be, when a horse spooks, sometimes you just cannot stay on. And that was my case. So I came off, and as my trainer said, I hit hard on my back, flat on my back, with my helmet on, of course. I won't ride without my helmet. But that definitely started this whole journey. I didn't lose consciousness. However, as you'll read in the book, there's some things that I experienced while on the ground there in the arena, listening to my trainer and good friend saying, "Don't move." But after I've discovered that there were no broken bones, I did what any crazy horse person does and got back on for just a few more minutes to end the ride. But driving myself home, and it was about an hour away, I got just increasingly tired, like abnormally severely tired, and I just went, expletive, I have a concussion. And little did I have respect for my brain at the time, and so I just went home, called some of my colleagues. As a former holistic health professional, I had lots of colleagues and friends in the industry, so I scheduled some appointments with them immediately for the next morning. Had the worst night of my life that I hope, knock on wood, I will ever have that night. My poor husband was trying to figure out, what pain medication he could give me without potentially causing, internal bleeding or things like that. But did I go to the ER then? Of course not. But I did actually the next morning, following some kind of gentle body work, and got a CT scan. They confirmed that I had concussion, and the ER doctor came in and quite verbatim said, "Congratulations, you're concussed." They gave me a 2-page handout on things to do and not to do with the concussion, gave me some over-the-counter, or not over-the-counter, prescription pain medication, just basically Motrin, and sent me on my way. So my husband was driving, of course, because I was in no condition to do that. And we were on our way home from the ER, and just 3 miles shy of being home, we were going through an intersection. We had the green light, and a woman coming the opposite direction, oncoming traffic, she turned left immediately in front of us. Unfortunately, physics was not on our side that day, and we couldn't avoid colliding with her, kind of T-boning her at the very tail end of her car, but impacting, of course, the passenger side of my car, which was only a year old, the very first brand new car I'd ever bought. So I was actually more angry at my car being damaged than I was of the fact of like, I'm 25 hours out from this fall from the horse on my way home from the ER and for this to happen. So, yeah. And this actually followed almost exactly a year. It was probably another 10 days, maybe. That would have been a year since I had been also passenger in a very, very bad car accident on the freeway. So I had just actually finished my accident-related treatment for that accident 6 weeks prior.
Wow.
So I had to call my attorney the next day and say, I have another case for you. So I was more concerned about, my car than I was me at the time. But that changed not too long thereafter. It was probably about 6 weeks later when I really noticed that I wasn't right. I was not sleeping. And I mean, not sleeping every night. It was maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep that I would get. And for anyone who, maybe if you've been a new parent or had any other challenge that has caused you to not sleep, you know that it is torture. And there's a reason why sleep deprivation is used as torture, because it is. So I realized that something wasn't right. And I also noticed that I would just blow up and get really angry, get really emotional. And I mean, I had no way to control my emotions whatsoever. So even though I was in the health industry, being a licensed provider, I didn't know what to do. And the ER hadn't given me any resources. They just said, you'll be fine in 2 weeks. So I started to talk with some of my colleagues, and they started to point me in directions for who might be able to help me. And it wasn't even probably for another month or so that I actually saw, probably on one of my chart notes, traumatic brain injury. And it was kind of then that it sunk in of like, oh, wow, this is something serious. And the next many months were very challenging as I continued to run my practice, see clients, and keep going just as I had been, but really realizing that that wasn't possible. And to figure out how to gain things like my balance back. It wasn't bad compared to the average person, but for me, it was not good. How to say words correctly. There are times where I have a hard time recalling words, or like now, I will have this kind of blank in my mind as I try to kind of go through the Rolodex in my mind of what word to use. But I would say sometimes the oddest things, I'm sure, when working with my clients. And then some things improved with various treatments, and other things stayed about the same. But I'm 8.5 years later, and I would like to tell the ER doctors that no, I was not fine after 2 weeks. So I'm actually going through the disability process. I'm thankfully coming up on a hearing date pretty soon. So hopefully we'll put an end to this long and daunting process. But my life has changed quite a lot, even since this book came out. Not everything's for the worse. There are a lot of things that are challenging every single day, especially since I used to be a super go-getter, like morning person, like at the gym and yoga studio. And now I have chronic fatigue syndrome and spend a lot of my time on the couch with my cat and a book. And my life is very different. And what I expect of myself is very different than what I used to even 9 years ago. So it's been a journey, a very up and down roller coaster ride. And even day to day is quite the roller coaster. So I know that a lot of people, there are about 3 million people who incur traumatic brain injuries every year in the United States alone. And as I told you when we talked before, that those are reported.
Yeah, exactly.
And those are reported through ER visits, hospitalizations, and deaths. So it doesn't account for the people who kind of subscribe to this societal idea of like, oh, it's fine. You'll just walk it off. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then go right back to doing whatever they have been doing. And of course, there's not equal access to healthcare, let alone different kinds of providers. So it's not an equal playing field for those of us who do have traumatic brain injuries who are diagnosed. So I knew that even though I was really struggling, and believe me, the struggle is real with PTSD, clinical depression, developing other things down the road that only in the last year and a half officially got diagnosed. So even, going on 8 years later, or 7 years later, at that point, finally getting official diagnoses. So I know how much I have struggled, both in terms of accepting what my current normal is, because I can't go back. I can only move forward. But boy, did I want to go back to how I used to be, and want to do anything that I could to just make it all go away. But that's not how this works.
It's a big impact, really. Like it touches all areas of your life. It's not just, one portion of your life has changed. Everything has
Absolutely
changed, right? And I think one thing we talked about in our first conversation before recording was, for people who don't understand, the impact of traumatic brain injury, there may be some insensitivity on people's behalf because they don't understand how much impact this could have on your physical well-being and health.
Absolutely.
And in that not understanding, there might not be sympathy or empathy or demonstration of trying to help and be a part of, to be an ally, as we talked about of this. And I know we talked about, from my perspective, knowing that this is a little bit in my family as well, is, and I know we're going to get to this in the episode, but I'm curious about how I can show empathy and be that ally for somebody in this situation. So, that's something that I'm just really curious about. And there's so much mystique and questions and misinformation out there that when it comes from the source and somebody who's living it every day, I'd rather default to you, because you can give real wisdom and real knowledge to people like me who are trying to figure this out.
Yeah. And before we can go into how to be a support and ally for someone with a traumatic brain injury, why don't we define what a traumatic brain injury is, so that people are all on the same, literally the same page here.
Yeah.
So a TBI is a head injury from blunt force trauma. So whether that's a fall, like a slip and fall, whether that's a car accident, hitting your head either on the headrest or on the windshield or part of the car, whether something hits your head, football, soccer ball, anything, doesn't matter what it is, but it's when the brain moves in this kind of whiplash effect, forward and back, or it could be, side to side, or some kind of torsion, but it's an acceleration, deceleration of the brain within the skull or the cranium.
Okay. Yep.
And they're classified from mild to severe. And know that those classifications are only indicative of the physiological trauma severity, and has nothing to do with how it impacts the person. So a mild concussion, and we'll get into what concussion is, a mild TBI can have severe consequences. So don't let that fool you.
Okay.
You don't have to have a severe TBI to have severe consequences. A mild will do just fine. It's like your level of spice. You might only need a little bit of spice to, really get the intensity. So unfortunately, the diagnosis of TBI relies purely on symptoms when people go for diagnosis, whether that's to the ER or their primary care physician. It could include the loss or impaired consciousness, disorientation, confusion at the time of injury. But I want to make it very clear that loss of consciousness is not a requirement to be diagnosed with TBI.
Okay.
One might have amnesia or memory problems for the event itself. It can cause nausea, also irritability, anger, and as I mentioned, difficulty regulating emotions, headaches, poor concentration, dizziness, and again, like it can include a loss of consciousness for more than 30 seconds, but that is not a requirement.
Okay.
And things that people experience after a TBI, the list is really long, so I'll try to kind of give you a little overview. But first, is a concussion a TBI? The answer is yes.
Okay.
It's like saying trash or garbage.
Okay.
Two different names for the same thing. At least that's the way that I describe it.
Okay.
Because it's the same injury, and also there's mild, moderate, severe, so it's the same rating system. But people experience brain fog, memory problems, delayed responsiveness to questions, difficulty learning new things, the difficulty with word recall, and some speech problems, headaches, blurred vision, dizziness or fainting, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, mild to severe, is in my case. Sensitivity to light and sound is extremely common.
Okay.
Ringing in the ears, sleep disturbances are also across the board. Pretty much everyone I know with the TBI has problems sleeping. And then emotional aspects like depression, anxiety, easily irritable or angry, personality changes, more emotional than they used to be, inability to control those emotions, and perhaps more impulsive. So that's what TBIs look like on paper. But the experience of living that every single day is a bit more challenging than just reading that list. But you at least get an idea of some of the things that people experience. And I will say that statistically about, at least this is what I've heard, although I would need to verify the source, but what I've heard from one of my TBI related trainings is that 80% of people tend to, quote, go back to normal after about a few weeks, maybe a couple months. But I've always been a high achiever, so I'm in that top 20% that didn't and ended up with post-concussive syndrome, which means that all of those symptoms that I just listed continue on. There are some sources that say that doesn't happen for more than 6 months. Well, I've heard from people who it's been almost 20 years and they still have post-concussive syndrome. So don't believe everything that you read on the internet.
Yes, exactly.
And even, unfortunately, some doctors are still in that belief as well. So that makes it hard too, when sometimes the providers that we seek help from don't believe that what we experience is real. And that's really part of moving into this conversation about how do we be better allies and supports for the people that we know with traumatic brain injury. And at least when I wrote the book, and granted, it's been a little while, so the numbers may have changed, but from the numbers that I got from the CDC here in the United States, the number of people who incur TBIs every year is almost twice as many than people with cancer. And I want to say, is it all cancer or breast cancer? I have to see. But in any case, almost everyone knows someone with cancer or who's had cancer. And so if you know someone who's had cancer, you likely know 1 to 2 people with a TBI, whether or not they know it themselves.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Those are staggering numbers.
Yeah. And of course, here in the United States, because we have sports like American football, but it's not just athletes who incur these. It's your neighbor down the street who slipped and fell on the ice in the wintertime. It's your coworker who was in a car accident. So it's not just military service personnel. It's not just athletes, although that might increase their risk a bit, but it's not just them. So in terms of how to be a better ally and support, I've come up with a list here that will hopefully be useful.
Great.
The first is listen. Just that. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. Avoid offering unsolicited advice. So consider first asking something like, would you like for me to just listen? Or would you also like some feedback? Also ask before sending someone resources. You could say something like, hey, I heard about this book called Head of Hope. That's for people with TBIs. Is that something that you'd be interested in?
I like the plug there, by the way. That was really well done.
Thank
Yes,
you.
very well done. Keep going, keep going. That was excellent.
Because I know for me, I mean, I'm quite educated on this topic, but I have received unsolicited advice from strangers and also family members who are like, you should go see this doctor. And I'm like, did I ask you if I'm interested in pursuing that, or even if I want to try anything at this point?
That makes sense. Yes.
And even one person telling me, I think I even put this in the book. She sent me a message saying I should try this like art therapy to reduce my cortisol. Well, she didn't know me. And so you'll find out in the book that I have pituitary damage that goes along with the brain injury. And so I actually don't produce enough cortisol. I actually have to take it. So I'm like, very useless to send me information on how to reduce my cortisol when I actually don't produce enough anyway. So, ask first.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Second is believe us. These so-called invisible injuries and their ramifications get invalidated far too often, even from close family, friends, and medical providers alike. Just because you can't see it or you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not real. I had a former friend tell me that all my problems were in my subconscious and that I didn't actually have any problems.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I've got years and years of medical documentation to show that my TBI was the cause in the onset for all of the challenges that I experience today. And those are very real.
Yeah.
And don't anyone try to challenge me on that. And definitely avoid statements like, but you look fine, at all costs. That's when I think just about every TBI person and maybe people with other, invisible conditions get at least a handful of times.
Yeah.
Because you never know how someone truly is based on how they look.
You're right. Yep, for sure.
And third is ask, what support would you like from me? And notice the wording and the subject of the sentence there versus how can I support you? In that last one, how can I support you? I is the subject of the sentence.
Yeah.
So you want to make this about the person that you wish to support. What support would you, the subject of the sentence, like from me? So to me, wording is powerful. And I mean, not everyone's going to get it every single time, but be mindful of these things because to me, it makes a difference and it might to somebody else as well. The person may not know what they need, and that's okay. But this leaves the door open for them to come to you when and if they need or want. So they know that you're a safe person to come to, that you're going to listen, that you're open to helping out when needed. Get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable with someone else's pain or suffering. Just simply be present with them without the desire or the need to fix or to make better. Even if you know you can't do anything, don't try. Because you're not going to be able to take away their pain, but realize that their discomfort makes you uncomfortable. And that usually is the drive, but I want to make it better because I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes it about your discomfort, not theirs. So remember that support is about them, not you.
Okay. That's really good. I like that one for sure. Definitely.
Thank you. And next is avoid comparisons. Saying things like, oh, I have that too, when it comes to things like memory challenges, or saying to that effect, like, oh, it must be old age. I heard this even right after my TBI. And I will say, I was 30 when I incurred my traumatic brain injury. So old age was not a factor. And I had impeccable memory before this. Not so much now in certain instances. But so, when people say these kinds of things, it's not a contest for who is suffering more. And it's not meant to discredit the experience of the person making the comparison, but understand that these attempts at empathy aren't usually well received by TBI folks. It's like, no, it's like, you may have memory problems, but the experience is likely different, and and that's for them to discuss. But remember that empathy is about connecting with someone's feelings or emotions of their experience, not necessarily the experience itself, but it certainly could be both. So empathy doesn't mean that like, oh, I had to experience a TBI to empathize, but it's the connecting with what somebody's going through, the feelings that someone experiences, even if you can't relate to the experience itself. And just two more here on my list is to practice patience and offer grace. People with traumatic brain injuries often mess up words, take more time to complete tasks. We forget things. We have difficulty and the inability to regulate emotions. We get fatigued easily. We need quiet and not bright or lower lit environments. And we need lots of rest. We might need to cancel appointments or get-togethers, leave early, and forget to show up or get the wrong date and time. Believe me, I have done all of these things. And some of them I still do. And this might make us seem unreliable, but that's not the case. Remember that these are not character flaws, but the result of a brain injury. So I'll say that similarly again. Remember that these are not character flaws, but the result of brain damage. Right. So for the person who has a TBI or the person who knows someone who does, it's like, oh, it can kind of take a bit of a weight off, because it's like, if I'm late or if I have to cancel, it's like, oh, I feel like it reflects so much on my character. But really, it's like, there are physiological reasons why these things happen. It's not for apathy, lack of motivation, or any of that. So just keep those in mind. So be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And lastly, get educated. Read up on TBIs through resources like my book, Head of Hope, and websites like the Brain Injury Association of America, brainline.org, and certainly countless others. But those are some really useful ones that I certainly have turned to. The person with a TBI that you'd like to support may not be able to explain everything to you at any given time. And so if you really care about the person, make the effort to get educated about traumatic brain injury and potentially some of these subsequent ramifications that that person might be dealing with, like PTSD or depression or other things. Do that on your own time. Make an effort to do that, because don't make them do that for you. Neurofatigue is a very real thing. And a lot of times people with TBIs can barely stand to read. So know that too. If you have the capacity to read, great. They may not. So those are my top tips for how to support someone with a TBI.
Jennifer, these are amazing. This is exactly what I was hoping we would cover today.
Great.
Because there are so many things that are actionable items for listeners. And potentially a relief to hear somebody say, if you have a TBI, to be listening to your voice and you say these things, and they're like, that's me, that's me, that's me, right? And to validate that it's okay that you're feeling these things and experiencing these things. This is the results of what's happened to you. So if you're fearing being judged, or you are showing a lack of effort, Jennifer, because you didn't come to my party, or you forgot my friend's birthday, like all these things, right? People just need to have more grace for each other and be willing to create space, to be there, but to also create space for each other. And I think what you've covered with these points, spectacular. Thank you so much for presenting these.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. And these, I've just learned through my own experience, for what I've needed, but also just kind of witnessing what other people in the TBI community have reported to. And, it's a really challenging road to be on. People want to get back to who they were, how they were. Mm-hmm. And we, like I said, we can't go back. And so for the people that also don't expect them to go back to who and how they were. Some people experience very minor changes with maybe their abilities or with their personality, and other people, especially people with a severe TBI, I mean, that's a whole other ballgame. I'm pretty highly functioning in the grand scheme of things, but interacting with some other TBI folks in the TBI support group that I attend, and seeing a wider range of impact, it kind of makes me go like, oh, like I'm more aware of the spectrum of impact that these brain injuries have on people. But there's a lot of grief that shows up time and time again. We ride those waves, but there's a lot of grief with going through this process. And I know that I have gone into very, dark corners, and it comes and goes. But when people feel hopeless, like they're never going to be able to live a good life again, that's the reason why I wrote this book, because I knew that I had lots of struggles, and I knew that even as a very educated and also well-connected person in the health industry, that if I had that many problems, I knew that other people weren't going to have the same results that I would without further guidance.
It's excellent. So Jennifer Soames, the headofhope.com, Head of Hope, the book, a resource and empowerment guide for living and thriving with a traumatic brain injury. I've learned so much tonight, Jennifer. I really do appreciate you taking time to educate, instruct, and encourage. I hope that people will connect with you for the book, reach out to you through the website, and just encourage you as well. Thank you so much for sharing with us on the podcast. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and for those of you who are interested in copies of the book, visit headofhope.com. You can order copies there. It is available also on Amazon, particularly if you would like a digital Kindle version. And you're welcome and invited to follow me on social media. My handles on both Facebook and Instagram are Head of Hope T.B.I.
Excellent, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
All right. It's been a great time talking to you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Hello, and welcome to Head of Hope. I'm Jennifer Soames, traumatic brain injury survivor and advocate, holistic health professional, and author of Head of Hope, a resource and empowerment guide for living and thriving with a traumatic brain injury. Here on this site, you can find out more information about the book, a little bit about me, and you can order the book directly. It is my hope in writing this book that you and other TBI survivors get the validation, inspiration, information, effective treatment options, and resources that you need to not only recover, adapt, but to really live your best life even with a traumatic brain injury.
let's face it, it's not always easy to navigate this road to living with a TBI. And so my hope is that this book gives you just a little bit of a roadmap on how to do that. If you have a question or a comment about the book, drop me a line up at the contact form. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for stopping by, and I wish you all the health, happiness, joy, and hope in living life with a traumatic brain injury.